For so long, the conversation about diversity in the film and entertainment industry has revolved around representation in front of the camera. And while this kind of representation is crucial for the movement for parity, it is only one small step. The bigger conversation that has the ability to usher in real change must be shifted to focus on the lack of diversity among senior executives within all areas of the industry, particularly in Hollywood. Last year, I interviewed with a Hollywood movie studio for a producing opportunity for an A-list film. They were in a scramble when they suddenly realized after 2 years of development that there were no people of color above the line, basically the positions responsible for the creative development of the film. Yes, there were actors of color in front of the camera, but key creative executive roles were void of people of color. In the end, after a few rounds of interviews with Black producers, they decided not to hire a producer because leadership decided they were too far into the process. It was heartbreaking. Diversity among senior executives is important. Let's look at some numbers. Right now, approximately 90% of CEOs and executives of television and film studios are white. Out of the nearly 2,000 film festivals we surveyed in the US, only 12% of them are owned by people of color. According to IndieWire, white men still accounted for over 80% of film directors at the studio level. In 2020, the National Endowment for the Arts spent an estimated $150 million to support diversity programs, with a lot of that money going to programs run by predominantly white institutions. And out of the approximately 3,200 Academy Award winners, less than 5% were people of color. Before Oscars So White, 92% of Academy members were white men and 75% were male. Even after making their diversity goals, the Academy voters today are still made up of 81% white voters, while nearly 40% of the US population identifies as a person of color. April Rain explains, since the majority of the Academy are white males and the nominations are viewed through their lens, that may explain why we are seeing the nominations that we are today. We all bring our own lens and our own experiences to our entertainment consumption. Here's another personal story. 15 years ago, I really struggled to break into the film and TV industry and grew frustrated by the lack of opportunities that were available to me. Each time I walked in and out of major film and media companies and found offices almost void of people of color, I felt discouraged. So back then, I decided to launch the Bushwick Film Festival in Brooklyn and recently became an independent producer and writer in Hollywood. By operating my own film company and projects, I made sure that everything from my staff to our filmmakers, our audiences, the stories that I share and tell, and even our corporate partners truly reflect the diversity of our country. Nevertheless, people of color in the industry like Issa Rae, Dawn Porter, Gina Rodriguez, Karen Chin, Charles D. King, and so on, should not have to carry the burden of creating an entire company to get access to leadership roles. Today, this is what the top 25 Hollywood studio executives look like. Walt Disney, Marvel Studios, Paramount Pictures, 21st Century Fox, Legendary Entertainment, Columbia Pictures, Pixar, Warner Brothers, and so on. These executives, about 90% of them being white, have had billions of dollars at their fingertips, making decisions about what stories we see on screen. While researching this talk and seeing the decision makers at the top, I got the same despairing feeling in the pit of my stomach I got 15 years ago when I was trying to forge a path in the film and entertainment industry. Because of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, we've seen some great changes and have had some diversity wins. Most recently, projects like Coda star Troy Kotsur making history as the first deaf man to win an Oscar, Ariana DeBois making history as the first openly queer woman of color to win Best Supporting Actress. And on the studio executive level, we've seen new executives like Parul Agrawal at Warner Brothers, Kalia Booker at HBO, Zhao Chen at Columbia, Aaron Edmonds at Lionsgate, etc. However, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we still have a long, long way to go. The lack of diversity at the executive level of the film and entertainment industry is still a major barrier to parity. 40% of Americans identify as a person of color. Could you imagine what the world would look like if 40% of studio executives in Hollywood were people of color? What if 50% of executives in Hollywood were women? Could you imagine what the world would look like if we had more queer representation at the studio level? Imagine the incredible depths of stories we would get to experience. Movies have the power to tell us how to think, feel, and treat people, including ourselves. What we forget is that American films penetrate the culture of every nation in the world. Go to almost any part of the world, and our films will be showing at the local theater and on TV. We are distributing our values and narratives on a global scale. As a young Liberian immigrant growing up in the US, consuming American movies and TV, I never thought of the people that were responsible for the content that I was exposed to. I never thought of the people that decided which stories were being told, which narratives were allowed to be on screen, and what type of people's hopes and dreams mattered. What I learned from being exposed to content was that people that looked like me weren't important and were often one-dimensional. What I was robbed of experiencing was the incredible spectrum of life and all of its diverse nuances. As I quoted earlier, we all bring our own lenses and our own experiences to our entertainment consumption and choices. If more people in the room have diverse lenses, then the audience will have the opportunity to receive full, beautiful stories. So if 90% of studio executives who are responsible for the decision of what makes it to the big screen are white men, then we are receiving a distorted picture of our world. You know, it's really great to see more space being made for people of color and diverse characters in front of the camera. And that is how it should be. But now it's time to make space for people of color in the top levels of leadership. The industry doesn't need just another diversity rollout plan. Lasting change is unlikely until the institutions themselves make core leadership positions reflect the diversity in our country. Right now, we are not seeing systematic change. We are seeing diversity initiatives rising and falling with headlines. We are seeing diversity initiatives that are only focused on casting without making changes behind the scenes on the executive levels. I'm sure many people of color like me have had the despairing experience of seeing their companies and networks get riled up about making diversity changes in 2020 and still have yet to implement those changes 2 years later. John Gibson at MPA said, if you look at all the corporations that made statements about Black Lives Matter, only 20 to 30% have actually followed through on those commitments. That's reactionary. You have to do transformative work. It takes time, but you have to have true commitment to it. I understand the ideals of diversity and inclusion can take a while to be realized. That's why we all need to continue to hold space for this conversation and persistently advocate for its subsequent actions. Here are a few of the many organizations that continue to fight and advocate for parity behind the camera in Hollywood that you can support. Color of Change, the NAACP Hollywood Bureau, GLAAD, Brown Girls Doc Mafia, and Gold House. I believe we can usher in a new era of true parity in film and entertainment within my lifetime, so that when the next generation of aspiring creators and professionals walk into major studio offices and boardrooms, they are not faced with the feeling of despair in the pit of their stomachs, but a feeling of hope and excitement for their ideas, projects, and possibilities. Thank you.